Sorry, yeah, I think as always with the recording at the moment, it always just cuts us off.
There we go.
There we go. Brill.
All good.
So
Awesome. Thank you. Let me just get my screen going. Inevitably, it's being annoying. One moment. Okay. Let me know when you can see that.
yep.
And I just trying to get it on the. Is
Yeah,
that
that's
sharing
great.
full screen now?
That's full
Fab.
screen. Brilliant.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for having me today. The topic of the talk I'm going to give is about homegrowing service design capability in government. It says September 2023 because that's when I gave this talk first at Service Design in Government up in Edinburgh. It was a really enjoyable talk, and we had a lot of good discussion after it. So hopefully we'll be able to do the same today. I know that Andrew Knight, he came along to that talk too, and so I'm thinking that maybe that's why he thought that this community or others would benefit from hearing it. So I will I say who we are. There's two of us here, but it is just me. My name's Jen Staves. I'm the Deputy Director for Strategic Design and Making Tax Digital here at HMRC. I won't read to you about my background. You can look at that. But this presentation I did put together with Simon McCartney, who is the head of service design, head of profession for service design in HMRC. And Simon's been a sort of brilliant collaborator on this. Sadly, he wasn't able to give this talk with me at Service Design and Government because he got sick, and then he wasn't able to join today either. So, but he is here, and hopefully you'll be able to sense his presence through the conversation, just to make sure that we bring in kind of his kind of enterprise-wise insight as well. So I think what's quite useful, and the reason that I'm talking about the topic of service design and government and growing it is just to give you the context of Making Tax Digital, and that's the program that I'm in. So Making Tax Digital is just, I won't spend too long on this, but it's quite a big program. It's been going for a long time. It wants to make it easier for individuals and businesses to get their tax right and keep on top of their affairs. The first Making Tax Digital was for VAT, and now we're currently doing self-assessment. So what it actually means is that there's a digital service offering for customers with business and property income. It's changing the way they keep their records, and so they need to start keeping digital records. And it's changing the way that they file their returns. So we will require quarterly in-year updates about their ongoing tax affairs through their digital channels. And it requires, and it's a bit of a change, but it requires customers to keep digital records using MTD compatible third-party software. So you might have seen some of these software packages out there. It could be like Xero or Intuit QuickBooks or Sage or some smaller ones out there as well. Like, it's a really vibrant community, but it is a bit of a behavior change to start doing that. I'm not going to go through this in too much detail, but this kind of gives a little bit of sense about what it means in practice. So businesses keep their records digitally. Then software might use built-in checks to prevent the errors before the information is sent to HMRC. APIs allow the software to interact with HMRC on the quarterly basis. That information is submitted to a tax management platform, ETMP, that plays back a record to the customer. Payment deadline. So you kind of keep going. So it's just a little bit of a sense, and hopefully gives you a real sense of all the different places that things need to happen in. So I joined about 15 months ago now, and what really struck me when I joined is it's a big cultural shift, not just for customers, but there was a big cultural shift that needed to happen for the program too. And there was a real sense at the beginning that it was just an IT project. MTD is just an IT project. Customer experience is the software's responsibility. We just need to build and provide the APIs, do the backend stuff, job done. But that's obviously not the case. Even if we think it might be, it isn't. This is a huge behavior change program. Understanding that this is a huge shift for the taxpayer, even if it's a a good one in the long run, is essential. And just because we might not be building all of the user interface side of things, because lots of it will happen in software, we will be building some of it, and designing some of it, and we can't just close our eyes and hope that what's happening outside in the real world works, just because we've been focusing on delivering the IT. There's a big cultural shift for the program. And so, in my opinion, when I came in, MTD had been in existence for 6 years. We had to push back their delivery date. We had to push back our delivery date. Lots of reasons for this, but in a nutshell, it's because of complexity. It's a really, really complex program. And when we announced the move of the mandation date back by 2 years, it was a chance to step back and take a look at how we could do things much, much better from a user-centered perspective, whilst of course understanding that a lot of choices and decisions had already been made that might be blocking the positive change that we'd want to make. And I think this quote is one of my favorites, from Sarah Drummond. Most service design is brownfield most of the time. So it's amazing when you can do service design from scratch, and you can build things up and you have unlimited money. But in government, it's very, very rarely the case. So you have to work with what you have, and you have to be able to do service design in areas and in places and on things where you don't necessarily get to do all the things that you'd ideally want to do if you were doing it from the beginning. So that's something. But then I think, so that's the problem, but what's the problem behind the problem? This is a bit of a legacy thing too. And so the design team that I took over was more than 80% business analysts, and not as much focused on service design and other things, but more than 80% business analysts, really, really good business analysts as well. And as you know, good business analysts are like gold dust. But you need more than one type of role when you're doing design. MTD badly needed this kind of service designers at the whole. There were blockers to doing that. MTD also needed service designers to be looking upstream to the left with policy, and helping inform a lot of that policy, those policy decision makings, because a lot of times what was happening is that when design came into it, it was too late. The kind of decisions and complexity had been baked in. So we needed service design. I knew that from the other departments that I'd worked in, and in the projects and programs and products and services that I'd worked in. But the budget was tight, and recruiting service designers was really hard too. Government departments essentially compete with each other, and keep taking them off each other. So HMRC, there are actually over 600 civil servant BAs across these levels, and there's 25 service designers. So I think you could see, or I could see, that there was a potential pool. And I know that can be a little bit tricky. There were 40 BAs in line, some with the design remit, but this was more process design. And as part of an org design, we were bringing down the number of business analysts we need. But so I needed service design, but I know some people would have asked, why just service design? Why not UCD as a whole? And this was the reason why. We did have some user research already well established, and we were able to build off existing contracts. We did need more content and interaction design, but at the moment, because we were designing a system that software needed to work in, and other things needed to work in, we needed to prioritize service design first. So service design in HMRC, this is where Simon would have been talking. So we've got a nice little picture of him in the corner. So this is so we can feel like Simon can talk to us about this. So the design maturity levels in HMRC, I think Simon would say here that HMRC has various levels of service design maturity across the organization, and directorates might range from emerging to appreciate the benefit of design to, fully embedded with designers working hand in hand with the scoping of new projects and services and initiatives. I think what he's noticed is that the departments in HMRC where design is strongest correlates to the departments with senior cover, with senior civil servants or others who have a design background themselves and who can actively advocate for that. And at the time that we gave this talk, he'd run 13 campaigns over the last 12 months, of which only say 4 to date people were appointed. Only one campaign provided a candidate who qualified for the reserve list. And there was lots of interest in mid-weight roles from people outside the profession, but they couldn't directly evidence the skills needed. But they did show examples of the right mindset for service design. So I think that's just interesting. So it was a bit of a perfect storm. I needed service designers. I went to Simon as head of profession. He's like, oh, it's really hard. So we started to work on that and thought, what could we do? So Simon says, and not necessarily this is his words, it always makes me feel a bit embarrassed, but he was saying that he really wanted to help support me to kind of think about how we could grow that within. And then I had backing from my director who really understood the value of service design. But obviously we wanted to look at how we ensure we protect the service design profession while increasing the capability. We didn't want it to be that we just make people service designers and next day you wake up and you're like, ta-da, we wanted to make sure that, we're actively supporting people to do that. So that was what he would say. You can read that yourself. So we thought, what could we do? So our hypothesis after some soul searching was that we wanted to retrain some of our business analysis cohort into working service designers in flight within a year. And we felt that if we could do that, if we could deliver a lead in the program, giving regular coaching and mentoring, the necessary sort of mindset shift for the person, the necessary mindset shift for the team around that person. Because, if you have, say, 10 business analysts and, you're working on someone and 2 of them are working to be service designers, the other 8 business analysts still might very much see them as business analysts. So making sure that the team kind of could adapt to kind of work with that role effectively. And then we knew that we needed a capability uplift, particularly in 3 areas: the prototyping, the user focus, and the user experience design. So step 1, I think what we realized here was when we talked about it with the program, there was a sense from many business analysts in the program, not all, some, that service design is what they already do. And this can be a red flag. It doesn't have to be. Because I do think on a basic level, you can draw some comparisons, but obviously they're not the same. They're called 2 different things. And part of the process is just accepting that and moving on. And so we used a few slides and we had some workshops to talk through the distinctions to see, are people interested in that? And if you are, what could you do? So we pulled together 2 different kind of portraits, pen portraits, depending on what, what I'm going to call. Here's the one for a service designer. I'm not proposing to read this all out, but obviously you'll have the recording. You can look back at it, you can see all of those things. But we wanted to pull out the key things for a service designer MTD, what the role is, what you want to achieve, the skills that you have, the behaviors you display, the artifacts you produce, and how best to work with service designers. And we can always look through that. But we also did it for business analysts, and same kind of structure, but you could start to feel that there were a few different things. So even if we just look at the top one, what is my role? And this is for MTD. It might not be the same in every single program, but portrait of service designer, I design the end-to-end and front-to-back journey of a service to help a user complete their goal and government to deliver policy intent. I work in a multifunctional team to create a shared understanding across stakeholders for how those complex journeys and services work and where there are opportunities to improve and optimize these. And I interpret and champion user research to ensure user needs and experience are captured in design. So if we look at what is the role for the business analyst, I translate those business and technical needs into requirements and specifications to enable that seamless relationship between the customer, the business, and development teams. I act as the glue in a multifunctional team to bring the team together around requirements and solutions, helping to ensure traceability of what we deliver, that it maps back. And I think, as you see, both of those things are incredibly essential, right? The business analyst role, incredibly essential. The service design role is incredibly essential, but it generally doesn't work to have one person doing both those things. It's too much for one role, and something will inevitably get dropped. Also, it's two different mindsets, and so it does help to have both. So there's a little bit of like a comparison chart. Again, I wanted to make it really clear, and I'm sure everybody knows this, but I can say like both are critical. There's not one that's better or less good than another. They're just different things, and they're both incredibly important parts of the team. But because there is a little bit of overlap or working in the same space, the BA, because it is that glue role, in many ways, depending on mindset, can easily be retrained into other roles because they have that kind of much more central glue understanding. I got just a few examples here. Business analyst primarily focused on the business, technical, or operational efficiency of elements. Service designer, the primary focus is on users and their needs across the end-to-end service. Business analyst is more about the why the current service may not be working. Service designer is more about the how the future service should work and meet user goals. So a few examples there. There's a few others in around data, insight, and prioritization and artifacts. So then we wanted to kind of look at the candidates that we might have. So this is step 2. So who could be trained? And because we were doing that reduction in the overall numbers of BAs, we used that opportunity to offer to those BAs who might not have wanted to been able to stay in as a BA via an expression of interest as a service designer retraining. We use the DDAT framework and SFIA and ask for transferable skills and experience in these areas. And those are pulled directly from the framework. So it wasn't necessarily that you needed to show that you could do all of those things. It's the transferable skills in that space. So the designing and developing users' digital and offline tasks, identifying and describing the user objectives, prototyping as a team activity, and collaborating with user researchers and representing the user internally. So we had some SO roles and some G7 roles. And, I can see over on the side, there were 7 opportunities available, 0, none of them applied for the G7, 2 applied for the SO. And it's interesting because I was a little bit worried about offering the G7 because the G7 is very much a leadership, starting to be a senior service designer. I think it would be hard to move across at that point, but we wanted to leave that option open. But nobody ultimately, after looking at it, felt that that was the right thing. 2 applied for the SO, and both of those were successful in moving to the trainee role, and they were selected sort of using independent panelists, as with all civil service recruitment. We help them measure their initial capabilities. So this is something very much led by Simon, because he has a great sort of self-assessment matrix based on the description of skills. So, that matches with the framework. You have your core skills and you kind of say, this is where I feel I am. Do I have no experience in here? Limited, basic, proficient, and advanced. So that's a help starter because you do need that kind of personal take on where you are. And so here's what it is these two, where they felt they were, right? So some basic experience around research, some really strong soft skills, and which is important. There's a service design, a huge part of service design is communicating between the technical and non-technical. So those soft skills can take you far. Maybe limited experience with prototyping, but we knew we could support with that, and some stronger things around core design skills.
Just check, Jen, it might be on mute in case there's a pause.
There, sorry.
No worries.
I hope I haven't been on mute for long. Step 2, we got them started on doing some desk-based insight reviews over different personas and across different journeys of what we know and don't know, and proposals for further research, articulating a problem statement, and understanding who the users and stakeholders were and that there were any user needs. So that's just a starter. We used just like a simple summary deck, and some used a mural board to capture those synthesized insights. Then we wanted to get them started on as-is journey mapping, which is a really helpful thing, not just for them, but also for the program. It sounds bad, but there wasn't as much as-is journey mapping as there should have been, if I'm honest. You usually shouldn't start changing things if you don't know what where you currently are, but there wasn't as much as we had hoped in certain areas. Some areas there was some, but so this was a really helpful piece of work to help them practice with their journey mapping, but also to support the teams who were kind of picking up new features and starting to unpack new epics. So what's the as-is journey? What are the pain points, potential areas, and suggested research questions? Then we started to get them into a little bit deeper into service blueprinting. And this is a great activity. Generally, it's something that services should start to build for themselves so that they understand like what's happening above the line, what's happening below the line. So this is around who all the actors are and what channels they're using, obviously pain points and research questions, enablers. So those back end and those business processes are really, really critical here. Because often, particularly in legacy government departments, legacy systems, those back end and business processes are often taken as read, and they end up driving a lot of the design. So understanding what's happening there means you actually can start to look at whether you can push back on any of those things or change any of those things. Then suggested areas for improvements and statements. So that was a really good activity to help them get started and just get them comfortable. And it's obviously, a few steps on from process maps and goes a level deeper and starts to understand people. Got them starting to prototype. So this was a little bit trickier, but they started to do some good stuff. They designed hypotheses. They started to develop, low fidelity prototype solutions. So it can start with sketches. It doesn't have to be anything major. We actually really wanted to get them comfortable with doing low fidelity things that they can put out there and understand. And that visualizing a lot of these concepts, particularly when working with policy colleagues and other things, visualizing what's in, what's there really helps our policy colleagues and other policies to realize that actually what they were envisioning as the way their policy might work actually might not work, and you can feed into those things a lot sooner. So that was how we got them started. And when I gave this talk back in late September, this is where we were. We'd gotten them started, and then we were doing we were going to let them shadow. We were going to do a mid-year check. We were going to give them a small project to work on, do an end-of-year review supported by the evidence, and then a step, not like we were going to do a little bit of a retrospective and lessons learned. And then the idea would be at that point, after an end-of-year review, as long as they can show they're at working level within the DDAT framework and others, then they can be sort of more formally seen as a service designer. Until then, we didn't just give them a name. They always kind of knew that they were kind of in training or retraining. So that was where we were now. Now, obviously, we were a few months on from that, and I can give you a little bit of a sense in a minute about kind of where we are with that now. So one of our service design retrainers, she gave some great feedback, that I thought it'd be nice to share. So the thing that surprised her, she said, the main thing that surprised me with service design was the realization that you never stop learning. There's so many different avenues to go down, techniques to use, which makes it exciting, as every piece of work you work on can be different, but you're always putting your own spin on it. You have a really kind of huge sense of ownership of every time. And what she's most enjoyed, she said, during the training, seeing how other people work and approach things. As a BA, processes could be sometimes quite samey for me, but in service design, there's a varied toolkit that you can use that helps change your approach. Watching how other service designers approach their work, the techniques they use, and how they connect the dots between stakeholders to see the bigger pictures is so fascinating. It makes every piece of work much more interesting. What's been most challenging? So Amy said that shifting my BA mindset to an SD mindset has probably been the most challenging part. As a BA, you spend a lot of your time understanding stakeholders' objectives as part of business requirements in a lot of detail. But as an SD, you kind of help shape those and influence those objectives, meaning that as a service designer, you must constantly think of the big picture and not just focus on the detail of one part of the service. And in some instances, it's been hard to think of the why we're doing this, the what we're actually trying to solve and how it affects the bigger picture, instead of just getting the detail needed and going straight for solution mode. So yeah, that was some good feedback from Amy. Amy's been brilliant. Massive success story since then, it's worth saying. So now we are trying to think 5 months apart. So, and Amy's she's going from strength to strength and has really, really just grabbed that. I think with our other one that has really enjoyed it as well. I'm not sure necessarily that it's like ignited that same passion that they want to go on with it forever, but still really enjoyed it and is doing really, really good work. So the impact on the roles on our program that it's had by doing that is that for the business analysts, they now have more scope to focus on the end-to-end on testing and tracing requirements, and they have a greater clarity of role. Don't feel like they're stretched too thinly. And then for the service designers, then we've increased the numbers of service designers in the team, greater representation for the user in the team, and made sure the focus is balanced. And then for MTD, just one at that point were visualizations from the customer perspective rather than a business perspective. A really big, for example, I just pulled it up, but we now have like a customer facing roadmap that shows what everything that's delivered, what that means for the customer journey. And that's been created by Amy and our other service designers. And that's become a core artifact that we share internally and externally. And it's massively increased confidence in the program because it shows that we actually understand how the program works for people. So that part has been a really big success. Alongside this, we were working to build permanent capability. So we were recruiting 1 grade 6 lead, 2 senior service designers, and 3 midweight SOs alongside our trainees. In an ideal world, we'd have had these roles in place before starting. Although I'm not sure, and it's just the way government works, that we could have gotten agreement for that permanent capability without that experiment first. We now have our grade 6 lead in situ, and it's amazing. Our 2 seniors are nearly onboarded, and some of our SOs are well as others. So I mean that just comes back to that point that Simon said at the beginning about recruitment and how long it takes and things like that. So if we had waited and hadn't been able to support that, we might not have been able to get as far as we did on some of that really important understanding. And the reflections that we had at the time on what we would do differently, it was really tricky to start without having that dedicated grade 6 lead embedded into the program. And we kind of learned as we went with that, and we had some support from a contractor, and obviously Simon lent in a lot, but they also have other roles to do too. So I think if we did it differently, we said that we'd have a dedicated permanent civil servant lead. We've obviously got that now. So if we want to do this again, we're in a much better place to do that. We'd have those projects probably closer to ready set. We kind of learned as we went and thought, oh, what could they do within those things? And we'd probably have much more of a monthly structured plan with checkpoints to kind of make sure everything's on track. And I think what we were saying to the group when we gave this talk was, would we recommend you try it? Because we were conscious that recruiting service designers isn't necessarily just a problem for us. It's a problem, across the government, like we said. And so we said that, yes, we would recommend you try it if you've got a head of profession and they agree to support it. You have a DD, other senior civil servant who knows what good looks like in the program and can ensure the integrity of the UCD. You have a civil servant lead who can dedicate the time, and you have an excess in roles, and you can establish potential through a transparent selection process. We thought those were really, really critical. We wouldn't recommend you try it if you don't have a head of profession or you don't have their buy-in. If you don't have buy-in at senior level for what good looks like to ensure that integrity, know if you expect them to be that role from day one. Like I said, you know, you go to bed, you wake up the next morning and you're like, I'm a service designer now, but you have to know that they're not going to be able to be it on their own from day one. Or if you're doing it to tick the boxes of having a certain role. You know, if you say, oh, we need a service designer in a team, you'll be the service designer. If you're doing it for that reason, it's not for the right reasons. I think I'm coming to the end. So closing thoughts, not easy. Still lots to learn. That we're 4 months in at the time, now kind of 9 months in, small victories in some areas, lots of appetite. And thank you to the people who were involved in the work. And actually, I can see Dennis is waiting in the lobby, and he's one of the people who was really, really integral to this work and did a lot of mentoring of both Jed and Amy, you know, as an established service designer himself. So I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And that's it. But, you know, really happy to answer any questions, have a chat. Anything really. If people want to come on and have a chat, have a group chat. If there's questions in the chat, Jonah, do you want to just pull them out for us?
That's great. Thank you so much for that. It's really, really interesting. And yes, if you do have a question, please do raise your hand. And if not, I can start with questions in the chat whilst people think of their questions or want to put their hands up. So it looks like, it's just scrolling up now. Yeah, so there's one I think from earlier on about asking from Molly, I think. What services were you asking to blueprint, and how much of a sandbox was it versus actually giving them case? Oh, sorry, there we are. I'll let you take over, Molly. Sorry, I jumped in on there.
Oh no, not I was happy for you to do so. I just thought I would say that I'm here, and I'm still here with my question. So yeah, I just wondered how you put together the cases that you were asking the trainees to work on. How much of a sandbox was it versus how much were they kind of embedded in work that was happening with real clients and real situations? I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, definitely. So we've got within MTD, there's within Making Text Digital, there's a bunch of different services. We've got like a sign up service, we've got a software choices service, we've got, you know, there's services that we share because they're much more kind of enterprise services that MTD feeds into, like there's view and change where you might be signing in and doing things in self-assessment. We're also building a new submission service for those customers that, you know, need to finalize that aren't in software. So there's a lot of different things going on there. And so some of those things were new. So like say in the submission service, you could ask them just to kind of have a little bit of a play around on how things worked. We would also just, it wasn't always necessarily the full service, starting with different journeys. So it's a good question. I think we'd probably, and I'm trying to think back to the specifics of what we did give to Jed and Amy, but I think we might have got them in on the simpler ones to start. I don't know, actually. I'm kind of blanking on the exact ones. I don't know if Dennis is in the chat, if he remembers what he got Amy, what they started to work on. But, you know, we just got them to start small. And work on how some of those things fit together. Sorry, that's not the best answer.
It's just more like, you know, how much of this might be like a standalone curriculum that you're actually sort of building rather than, you know, the embedded ongoing learning. Because I'm trying to imagine this approach, which I really appreciate, but in our context, we're a small agency, we're building the ship as we sail it. And
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I'm thinking about like, what was the lens you were applying to get meaningful learning while also shipping, you know? So
It's such a good question. And like in an ideal world, we wouldn't do it this way, right? You know, like if we're really, really honest, we would not do it this way. We would, you could go on an apprenticeship, you know, you could have something with much more tailored curriculum, or you have time to study, and then you might be also having a little project that you feed into. But because these were people who were already in there, so say Amy, for example, she's a BA who already was working, in one of the teams. I can't remember which team she was working in at the time, but we had like a payments and repayments team, right? And we had a sign-up team. So whichever team she was in, I reckon what she would have been doing was, okay, take a step back, now look at that stuff that you were doing within payments and repayments and start to look at the blueprint around how that works. But it was not, like I said, it was pretty freewheeling to start. And that was one of the learnings at the end of, if we were going to do this again, we would not be freewheeling, because yeah, it's fun in some ways, but it's also a massive time drag. And we want service designers to be comfortable with ambiguity, but we don't need to inject unnecessary ambiguity on top of the ambiguity in the service already. What else is in the chat? So that was Molly. Christian, let's see. Well, I think what's next? I see one from Christian. So it sounds like this sort of multidisciplinary working, BA colleagues, service really lends itself to in-person working. Any thoughts, Renson? Oh, yes. I mean, in-person working is brilliant for teams, right? You get to go faster, you really riff off of each other in the moment, you learn from each other, you build. I'm a massive fan of things on walls, and that sort of working and kind of active sketching. But we have done loads in Mural, because I mean that is our sort of interactive whiteboarding tool. It's a really good tool. Obviously there's Miro, not allowed to use Miro. Others have Lucid, and there's all sorts of things. But that's kind of where we all come together. But we do try to get it together as much as possible. But I don't know how other government departments are, but there are often kind of restrictions on travel and subsistence and like travel, and so we have to find ways to work together in that collaborative way. Probably usually kind of using Mural and others, but we do try to get together. We have co-creation sessions and things like that where we do get together at least once a month to really push forward on tricky issues and bring together architects, designers, researchers, operational colleagues, just to all get together and really work through those meaty problems together.
Amazing. We've got some hands up as well, which is great. So I think Anna, if we want to come in, I think your hand was up first.
Hi, thanks so much, Jennifer. It's a really great presentation, and I really appreciate how candid and honest you're being. So thank you so much for that. I really am interested in your point around that mindset shift, because I've worked alongside BAs, and you can definitely see you come from with different perspectives, and that's what they need to do their jobs well. So I was just wondering, how did you measure that mindset shift of the individual and the individual's team?
It's a good question. And we didn't, it's because you can't measure it, in any kind of fair way. But what we tried to get across at the beginning, and like I said, when we gave that talk, there were quite a few kind of put their hands up and said it's the same thing, and I was kind of like, ooh, okay, you might not be the right mindset. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't say it like that, and obviously if they'd still had a go, it might have been fine. But that could also be because as a BA, they are often thinking about those things and want to be involved in those things. So, it can go either way. But the main thing was, when we tried to look for any transferable skills and experience in those key areas about like putting the user first or prototyping or visualizing things, that really did come out in the people who did think that way, and were, they had more things that they had done in their BA role, which were adjacent to that, because they were kind of naturally, they had those shoots of thinking that way. Amy was like a really brilliant example. And interestingly, I think like, I don't know, I think her background before being a VA was something much more people facing. might have been customer support. I don't remember, but you know, it was one of those things that often you might have that experience of just having been on the front lines, having been in operations, and having worked with people, and so you're naturally understanding what the impact on people is rather than just the impact on the business. So we didn't really measure it in that, although it'd be interesting to think how you could. If you have any ideas, I would love to hear them.
You've kind of got to the nub of my question. That was exactly why I'm asking, is because I work in Scottish Government, and we're doing arm's length co-design. So we're trying to figure out how do we measure that the people who are doing the design activity with people with experience as staff are doing it well, through the training and support that we're providing to them. So I will get back to you. I will let you know.
I would love that. Cool. Let's see, what else do we have in here? Pete, your job title, strategic design, how does that relate to service? No. So good question. So strategic design, you know, strategic design is a funny one because it can mean different things to different people. But I would say that like service design is part of strategic design, but it has other aspects as well. My background's very much more in sort of UCD, content design, service design. But that ends up like kind of always putting the user first, whereas like this, there is a strategic design element that brings together service design, and I think brings together the overarching kind of strategic objective of the business. But that job title was just given to me, so you know, whoever put it first is a thing, and I think it's probably you know, just you know, it's just different departments naming things different things for different reasons. But that understanding that in HMRC at least, often design comes too late, and you know, you don't find things out. So I think that kind of attaching it to strategic is almost trying to push it to the left, if that makes sense, and push it to up to where before decisions are made. That would be my guess anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry,
Go
just
ahead.
to comment on that, Jen. Thanks for that. Yeah, it's just because in HMRC, service ownership is becoming kind of established now. Various trials are going on across the department, or regime ownership as it's now been changed to, because our taxes aren't services per se, but there are services underneath them, I guess. And part of one of the roles is strategic design. I mean, I'm a huge advocate of service design and user-centered design, and I've been trying for quite a while to get that more introduced as much as we can into the early stages of design. We have quite a waterfall process at the moment. It's difficult, you know. It's a different, service design is a different discipline, I suppose.
Yeah, it is.
And in an area where we don't have that kind of senior buy-in, so it is difficult. But one of the roles within service ownership is strategic design, and wondered whether there was an opportunity to bring service design in as part of that role.
Okay, interesting. It'd be good to talk about that. Definitely, like, drop me a line after this. Be interesting to talk more about that. I don't know as much about that piece of work. I did hear about the service ownership and the regime ownership and how that works. I'll give you my honest opinions that it worries me to call it regime ownership because it makes the focus back on the business rather than the focus back on the user. And so I kind of think, what's the point? But don't, although you've recorded me now, so I'm stuck. But you know, I would say that to anybody at HMRC anyway. So hopefully you won't drop me back in it, Pete. But yeah, drop me a line after. Be really interested to talk more about that.
Sure, will do. Thanks.
Martin, if I was starting the project again today, what would I do differently and why? So I mentioned, you know, would have liked to have my grade 6 lead in place, and I do now, and that's really good. So I think we'd be in a lot better position. I think I would have a little bit more of a curriculum, like Molly kind of alluded to. I think that I was just thinking about the numbers. Like I maybe would have liked to have had a couple more than 2, just to see, like, because you know, you could do 5, right? You could do 6, and then maybe they don't all work out at the end of the year, but it's okay if 2 did or 3 did. So maybe it'd been nice to have a little bit more, a few more people in it, just to make sure that you kind of, but at the same time, because we were starting small and we didn't have necessarily that same kind of structure, it was probably right. But I think now that we have more structure, we could do it again with we could do it at a slightly bigger scale, knowing what we knew then.
Keen to bring in some of our hands up as well. I think
sorry.
Stuart, no, sorry, no, it's absolutely fine. Good management between the chat and the hands, I think, is always a good way of doing this. Stuart, yeah.
Cheers, Jonah, and thank you, Jennifer, for the presentation. Yeah, if I could echo Anna's sentiments, appreciate the openness, and it was a particularly interesting presentation. I've got a couple of questions. I think I'm going to start with the first one, obviously. So I work, it's the best place to start. So I work in a business architecture directorate, and I think there's a couple of us on the call as well. One of the things that kind of stood out to me a little bit is the potential for kind of overlapping some of the things that we do. So certainly your slide on service blueprinting kind of stood out for me. We kind of work in a similar kind of space, but I wanted to get your take on it, and granted this will depend on your knowledge of business architecture, but the interactions between, you know, a service designer, business architect, and potentially business analyst as well. Did you get a chance to explore that?
Well, not as much in this one, but in my last role, I was head of user-centered design at HMCTS, and they've got a really established business architecture function. So I had the pleasure of working with many business architects at HMCTS, including someone who's moved over. I think Dominic moved over from HMCTSU.
Yes, we know Dom, yeah.
Yeah, so I worked well with Dominic, and I think there's sometimes some tensions between business architecture and service design, but they don't necessarily have to be. You just need to be on the same page together.
Yeah.
And kind of understanding the levels of service design is really important. In my perspective, from my perspective, there's a really good blog post that can't remember her name off it now. She wrote that great, a really great book called The Service Organization. But she also, when she was at the Home Office, wrote a couple of really good blog posts about different levels of service design, and that service design is not a hierarchy. Do you know what I mean? Like, the levels of service design aren't a hierarchy. They're all incredibly important levels at which service design happens, and that there is obviously a level that's much more aligned to business architecture.
Makes sense.
And that's fine, but that doesn't necessarily connect it up. It's about the business, right? And the business capabilities, and doesn't always connect it up to the user. So it's about kind of finding that gradient, I think. And so we were starting to do that at HMCTS before I joined. I think when I joined here, reached out to business architecture, but I think there wasn't capacity at the time. But now there is, and that's really
fairly small at
the
time.
You're building up a bit, and I had a really good chat with Bernie earlier this week about things too. So I think there's much more opportunities than we're exploiting now.
Yeah,
to work together, but we just need to build up both our capabilities, right? Because we say 600 business analysts, 25 service designers. How many business architects? Probably even
30,
even
40,
fewer than
maybe. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, you can see like there's not necessarily the right balance just yet.
That makes sense. Yeah, brilliant. And we've got names now as well, which is always good.
Yes,
so thank you for
exactly.
That. I'll put my other question in the chat so I don't hog the thing. So thank you.
No problem.
Well, thanks, Stuart. And just Will, I think he's had a hand up a while as well. That'd be great. You want to come in?
Hello. So yeah, obviously really great presentation. Found it really interesting to see the steps you took to integrate someone and sort of the work that you would do and moving from service blueprinting, all this sort of stuff. I'm on the civil service fast stream. I'm a service designer at ICS/DESNES at the moment. So yeah, I'm really interested. Do you kind of take that approach of that sort of maybe that induction approach with new sort of junior or midweight service designers that come in, with fast streamers that come in? Is that something that you've kind of rolled out on a wider scope than just the BAs transferring over?
That's a good question. So we haven't had as many of the midweight ones joining it, although we do now. So I think we would absolutely reuse that approach, because even if for no other reason that, you know, the BAs that were transferring had the benefit of already knowing the program and just learning the skills, whereas, you know, hopefully the service designers that we've brought in have some of those skills, but they don't know the program, and this helps them to learn the program. You know what I mean? So I think, you know, it works both ways. I'm not sure whether Simon has thought about like rolling it out more widely, like enterprise kind of across the business. I'll ask him about that. But I think, if anything, because I was saying it's a little bit more ad hoc than we probably wanted it to be, I imagine if we had more of that curriculum, that would be great. And I especially imagine that would be great for fast streamers. Absolutely. Because you move around so quickly, it's kind of like a rapid onboarding.
That's exactly what I'm thinking as well, because as a person who professionally moves jobs, basically, that is the point of what I do. So it would be something that I'd find really valuable anyway, going somewhere and then being, here's the bread and butter of what makes service design. Here are kind of the toolbox that you need. Here's the sort of timeline you'll learn all that through and go from that. So yeah, I just thought that would be an interesting to ask about. So thank you for answering.
No problem. Is there anything
Yeah,
else
that's
still with
me.
hands
Sorry.
raised? Oh,
It
that's
just
right.
takes about 10 minutes to come off mute now because of the I mean it's a good thing and overall in terms of stopping people being filmed without the consent. But anyway, I was just going to ask, because I really appreciated the slide about which organizations and which conditions you think would be in place for your approach to perhaps take, because a lot of people kind of sell an approach thinking it's like the best thing ever, and it's kind of missing that nuance. But from a service design background, you would expect that. I guess because you're so early into this process, do you think that when you come to the end of that 12-month window, you'll have any plans to kind of, I guess, codify this approach so it can be scaled in other organizations, like more formally?
I think so. And that's a really good point, because we have the framework, right? We have the self-assessment. That's what MTD is all about. Self-assessment, you know, all across it. But the self-assessment will also have like that kind of hop, head of profession assessment. And then I think at that point we'll have the chance to kind of look back and say, okay, would we like to do that again? Would we like to offer that again? And I think we probably can package up those things and probably share them, like you say, so that if others do want to try it, and it does, you know, you do kind of meet the, not the criteria, but the ideal kind of scenarios for working it, that others could use it too. So definitely take that away.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
See if there's any others in the chat now.
Just saying, like, obviously application volumes is really low. Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of things going on in there, Adam. You know, the lack of the roles, the lack of applications. I mean, I'm not joking when I say government departments compete against each other. Those on the capability pay framework versus those who aren't, you know, and that kind of that can really mess with things. I'm glad that you think it's a good alternative approach. I think particularly in HMRC, we have a lot of people who, you know, like to stay for, or not like to, they feel comfortable at the organization and want to make their careers there. And so if you've got the right mindset, you have someone who's going to stick around, that can be a great thing, right? Because sometimes you can spend a lot of time like bringing someone in, onboarding, but then they're going to naturally move on. And Dennis in the chat, sharing helpful things. Thank you again, Dennis. I think that's probably it. And it's on, oh, Kate Tarling, that was it, Bernie. It was such a good book. I really highly recommend everybody reads The Service Organization. I feel bad that I blanked on her name when she's so good. But yeah, perfect.
We might have time for, well, I think Stuart's got one last one at the end there, if I haven't missed anybody else, about, definition of service.
Oh yeah, what is the definition of service within the context of the role?
I was just going to say, sorry, Jennifer, it's a slightly picky question, so it may not be for now, but it's certainly something in my mind that I kind of really struggle with is when I saw a definition of service, it was basically something that helps someone to do something, which is quite a broad definition. So potentially that could cause confusion. Do you kind of work to a definition of what a service is?
Oh my God. I have tried over the years to work with different colleagues to like define what a service is, and then you could have actually delivered, you know, 20 great services and the time it takes to like agree the thing. It's tricky. Services, products, microservices, you know, all of them, how they fit together. And services, just like you say, the offhand, because in many ways making tax digital on its own is not a service, it's a program, it's a collection of services. But to the user, they don't understand that it's a collection of services, right? They just take it from beginning to end. So it starts to go into like, what's our internal view versus what do we expose about that thinking to the user, which I always enjoy and try to stop doing.
No, that makes sense. I realize that could be a question that just opens up a whole different conversation, but yeah, no, I appreciate you. I appreciate you tackling it.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me, everybody. It was really nice to share. Glad you found the candor useful. That's kind of the only way I know how to be, but it can probably get me in trouble sometimes. But yeah, do reach out. I think we will be sharing the recording and the slides. So, and if you know, if you want to get in touch, you know, absolutely. I might not always be able to reply right away, but if we come up with more kind of artifacts and stuff for that approach, I'll definitely share them through those wider channels.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jen. I think that was some of the best sort of conversation and Q&A that we've had. I think that's been really, really great. So thank you so much. And yeah, I think that's it's really, really keen to sort of to see how that works. And you know, it's interesting now you've had that time, you can now move on from when you did it in September and reflect on that as well. It's been really, really interesting. So yeah, I think we'll wrap up there. It's perfect timing. And as always, please do subscribe to our Eventbrite page, and we do have another event on in April. So please do follow that link. It's in the chats. But as always, everything will be shared, and the recording will be shared in case you missed any of it or the first half or anything like that. So thank you very much, Jen. Thank you everyone much for taking part.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Bye bye.
Thanks all.